Hi everyone, welcome to Literature Circles Made Easy. I'm Laura Candler from Teaching Resources, and Peggy George from Classroom 2.0 Live is my moderator. I'm excited to be able to share with you strategies that will make your literature circles easy to implement in your classroom. As a classroom teacher working with 4th and 5th grade students through the years, I experimented with all kinds of literature circles. I quickly discovered that it wasn't always easy to implement literature circles, and I also discovered that some forms of lit circles appeal to my students a lot more than others. This evening, I'm going to share with you the method that became my favorite as well as the favorite of my students. I ended up referring to this method as classroom book clubs to distinguish it from other models such as literature circles with roles. Earlier this year, I created a series of slidecast videos to explain the program in great detail. I chose that format instead of writing a book because it's a lot easier for me to talk about literature circles and explain in my own words how to do the strategies, how to use the strategies. So this was a new format for me. But I'm not going to try to get you to buy my program. That's not what this webinar is all about. I guess I'm trying to sell you on the concept and share as much about it as possible during this session. I'm going to walk you through all of the essential elements of classroom book clubs, and if you like the idea, you'll have more than enough information to get started without buying anything. So please don't feel that this is a big sales pitch to buy the program. However, if you are interested in the program and you don't want to have to reinvent the wheel, then it might be something that you want to look into at the end of the session. But you'll find plenty of content in here to learn all about classroom book clubs. Let's take a look at the webinar objectives to see exactly what we'll be covering in this session. In this webinar, you're going to examine how literature circles fit into the Common Core language arts standards, learn about different types of literature circles, discover effective strategies for integrating literature circles into your existing reading program, and share your own strategies, websites, and tips for using literature circles. So that's just a little overview of where we're going with all of this. So quickly, what are literature circles? Literature circles basically are just groups of students who read the same book and get together to share their feelings, thoughts, and observations. And let me just change the polling to the yes/no options real quick. All right, if you have done some form of literature circles, whether it's with roles or whatever, would you give me a green check mark, or just click the word yes and it will show up as a green check mark? And if you have not done something like literature circles, then give me the red X. And some of you may be thinking, I'm not really sure if what I'm doing is literature circles or not. And I guess in that case, just don't vote on this one. Sometimes people consider something like guided reading to be a type of literature circles, and that's up to you as far as how you feel about it. So it looks like right now we've got 96 people, almost 100, probably 100 in just a minute, have done some form of literature circles, and 32 people have not done literature circles. So that gives me a good feeling, once again, for where we are. It looks like we have a high level of experience with different forms. All right, let's move on. I mentioned earlier that I was going to be referring to the Common Core standards for English language arts, and I really started digging into them and looking, and I was really amazed at how closely aligned literature circles are with some of the standards. So I actually ended up creating like 5 or 6 slides, and then I thought, no, I don't want to put all of that up at the front. So I'm just going to give you a quick overview, and then more towards the end of the webinar, I'm going to give you the specific standards that fit with literature circles, and some of you may really need that. If you have administrators that don't want you to try literature circles, you may have to pull out the standards and say, hey, look, it's right here. So English language arts is broken down into 5 big categories: reading, writing, speaking and listening, language, and media and technology. And I'm sure that literature circles meet all of these in some way, but I have put little red arrows next to 3 specific areas that you'll see later really tie into the Common Core standards. But I'm not going to, as I said, I want to jump into the content, and I don't want to get bogged down talking about standards right now. So we will move on and pick that up later. As far as the overall concept of literature circles, I've been working with it for maybe 15 years and tried all kinds of different things, and it seems to me that there's kind of a continuum of literature circles from really tightly structured teacher-directed models to very open-ended student-directed models. And the teacher-directed models, it seems like the teacher is making all of the decisions, choosing all of the books, and that kind of thing. And then the student-directed one, the kids have pretty much free choice about everything. I tend to like structure, but I have found through the years that too much structure really kind of kills the joy of reading and literature circles. So I've kind of played with finding something that's a little closer to the student-directed type. In my opinion, if when you use roles with literature circles, that's maybe a little closer to the teacher-directed type, because usually the teacher is assigning the roles and there's quite a bit of structure to what's going on. Let me just ask real quick, looks like the check marks were cleared. If you've tried literature circles with some sort of roles, would you give me a green check mark or a yes over there, and a red X if you've never tried literature circles with roles? And obviously, if you haven't tried literature circles, I mean, you don't have to respond. Looks like more than half the people responding have tried some form of literature circle with roles. Well, Harvey Daniels was one of the first folks who advocated literature circles with roles. I think his book was called Book Clubs. I can't even think of the name of it right now, but it was about student choice in the classroom. But he had roles in his model, but even in the last 4 or 5 years, he has turned away from using roles and has said that the best way to use roles is to start off with roles in literature circles. Like, I'm trying to think of some example roles. I'm totally drawing a blank because I don't use roles anymore. But there are a lot of problems with roles. One of the problems is if kids are absent and they don't do their role, and then they show up at the meeting and they haven't done their part, it kind of frustrates the other kids. It can be very, it can sort of stifle the discussion when kids can only do certain roles. So he has kind of reversed or modified his position to say that roles could be a good starting place, but we want to move kids away from roles. And I believe that, and I think that's kind of what pushed me towards working on a different model. So the model that I came up with, I call Classroom Book Clubs. It's just a name I actually kind of added on at the end to keep it separate from other models. But that's the method that I want to share with you this evening, some information about, a method that's a little more relaxed than using roles, but there's enough structure that it makes it easy to implement, and it makes it where it's not a waste of time, because there is some structure to it and kids are definitely getting something out of it. So that's kind of where Classroom Book Clubs fit into the continuum. Okay, these are some essential elements of Classroom Book Clubs, and this is not, this list is not a step-by-step list of how to implement it. I'm going to get to that in a few minutes. But some of the essential elements to me are that students need to have some kind of choice in their book selections. So maybe not total free choice. The teacher may come up with 4 to 6 books that they put out and the students choose from those books, but at least it's not just the teacher assigning a book to each student. I've found, as far as group size, that 4 to 6 students works best. If you group smaller than that, if a student's absent, it's really hard to have a good discussion, and any more than 6 really makes it hard for kids to stay on task. You need multiple copies of the same book, and I'll talk about that in a minute. The model that I used had the kids reading daily independently, and then having a weekly book club meeting. Some models may have the kids meet every single day for discussion, but mine did not. And there's some kind of meeting preparation, and there's a whole variety of things that you can do, and I'll be sharing that with you later too. So those are some of the essential elements. As I was putting together the webinar, I was really trying to think of what's the logical order to present all of this. And I thought, I think it's easier for me to tell you a little bit about the schedule that I had for book clubs and then tell you specifically how I implemented them. And I'm going to just say the suggestions here are based on grades 3 through 6. So if you are a primary grade teacher, you might put that in the chat box and ask people, how have you modified this schedule? What do you do differently? My classroom experience is not in the primary grades, so I'm not going to try to tell you what's the best way to work with your kids. So you will certainly have to do a lot of modifying. And then in middle school is like a totally different ball game because of their class schedule and that kind of thing. But I think you'll be able to get something out of this. Personally, I'm looking at the second bullet. For me, book clubs are best if they last 2 to 3 weeks, and I devote about an hour a day to them, and I don't use other forms of reading instruction during those weeks. And you may or may not have the flexibility to do that, but what I've found is that if you try to drag a literature circle over, say, an 8 or 9 week period, the kids lose interest. And if you think about it, if you're reading a book, do you want to drag that book out over 9 weeks and just read, 20 pages a day for a week and then talk about it and then drag it? It's like they lose their whole momentum on the literature circle. So I've found it's best to just take a break from other types of reading instruction and just do literature circles for a couple of weeks. My preferred method of teaching reading is the reading workshop approach, and this fits really perfectly because the kids are still reading independently 4 days out of the week. And then the last thing about the schedule, or a general comment, is that I had the kids have weekly book club meetings where they were actually talking about books, their books, and discussing them. And it could either be, for me it was all on the same day and they were all meeting at the same time. That was 5th grade. But if your kids aren't ready to all meet at the same time without you, you could have each group meet on a different day with you, and the other children are doing independent reading and preparing on their own while you're meeting with a group. So there's a lot of variations possible here. Here was my basic schedule for book clubs, the weeks I was doing book clubs. Monday through Thursday, I started with a read aloud and a mini lesson for about 15-20 minutes. And the students had a daily quick check, and I think I want to just tell you about that a little bit later, but it was a time for each group to kind of get together for 5 minutes and just check in with each other. And then they had maybe about 40 minutes of independent reading time. That was Monday through Thursday. So really, that looks a lot like the reading workshop approach. And then Friday was a little different. Oops, clicking in the wrong spot. Friday, or you could do a rotating schedule if you're having the kids meet with you individually. I did my read aloud in my mini lesson, but my mini lesson was usually on some kind of social skill that they would need during their book club, their actual discussion group. And then I introduced the kids to whatever meeting format we were going to use that day, and I gave directions. That was about 5 minutes. And then for about 25 minutes, they actually held their book club meetings. And then at the end, there's usually some type of written reflection or assessment activity. So that just gives you kind of a framework of how I was using book clubs in the 2 to 3 weeks that I had it going on. Then we would just finish that up and go right back to our other reading program. Okay, and if you have questions about that, as I said, you can put them in the chat box. At this point, I don't want to stop to answer questions because there's going to be plenty of time for that later, but somebody else may have an idea for you. So I wanted to move into a kind of a step-by-step approach to how to actually implement the classroom book clubs. Step 1 is that you need to select and locate appropriate books. And to me, that means a selection of books. I usually tried to pick 4 to 6 books that I thought might be appropriate. I'd have at least 1 or 2 kind of easy books, 1 or 2 challenging books, and 1 or 2 average books. Where I got them from was a variety of places. Over time, I created quite a collection in my own classroom using Scholastic Book Club points. And if you're not familiar with Scholastic deal that they have. I believe it was 5,000 bonus points you could get at the beginning of the year. Let me just ask real quick, just for fun, how many people are familiar with Scholastic's bonus point deal where you can get 5,000 points in September? And I have a whole thing on my website about how you can do this. You can send a letter home to parents and so on. It's really awesome because you can get all these points, and then throughout the year you can use those points to buy books for your book clubs and literature circles. And I would say that's where I got most of my books. In fact, when I went to clean out my classroom when I was leaving, I mean, just boxes and boxes and boxes of books I gave to teachers to use because I had collected just hundreds of them. So that's a really good place. Another place is sometimes if you have a literacy coach or something, they'll have a lab and they'll have collections of books. But you need, I would say if you're ordering books from the Scholastic Book Club, I would order like at least 8 to 10 copies of each book because sometimes they'll get lost and it's hard to find more copies of that book through the years. Step 2 is introducing the books to kids, and I would tell them a little bit about the book. I might read the back cover, just give them a little bit of kind of like advertise for it, and let them know that it was exciting, and kind of let them know if it was going to be real challenging or if it was something that may be a little less challenging. Then I had the kids prioritize their book choices. There's actually a form in the Classroom Book Club's program you can use, but just on an index card you can have them list the books that they would like to read in the order they would like to read them. Then I took those index cards or those slips of paper and I formed groups of 4 to 6 students. Actually, I guess I forgot, I actually have more detailed slides on these, so let me just finish reading these steps and then we'll go into some more of the details. I provide time for reading and written response. I have the weekly book club meetings, and I reflect on the participation and sometimes do extension activities at the end. So let me move forward because I completely forgot I had broken this down into smaller steps. So let's go back to the getting started part. I told you about how I like to locate books and introduce them to students, and I have a question for you in the chat area. What are your favorite books for literature circles? And if you would put your grade level, that would be wonderful. And I'll give you guys a minute to do that. And it might be even a favorite read aloud, even if you haven't done it with literature circles. Let's see what some of your favorite books are for literature circles. Stone Fox is a great one. These are great titles. Some old classics, some new ones. One of my favorites was The City of Ember, which I didn't even realize they'd made a movie out of that until the other day. I was listening to a show on TV that my husband was watching, and I was like, oh, wait a minute, that sounds familiar. I went in there. It was City of Ember. That's a great book. Hatchet is excellent for boys and girls. I have a lot of girls who like it too. Awesome. Thank you for sharing your ideas. And if you haven't finished, just keep tossing them in there, and it's something that people can go back to and look at later. Okay, so let me skip back to forming groups. I have the kids prioritize their book choices and form groups of 4 to 6 students. And I put based on book choice and personality and reading speed and ability. So this is kind of tricky. I try not to have just a low group that has nothing but low kids in it. Like sometimes one of my gifted kids might choose to read the book that's the easiest in the group. And I usually let the person do that if they want to from time to time. And then what I tell them is because it's an easy choice for them, they need to have another book that they're reading on the side because they're going to read through the the easier book quickly. But the neat thing about having a more advanced student in an easier book group is that they can offer a lot in the way of motivating other kids and challenging them and talking about the book, and they kind of like bring a higher level thinking aspect into the book discussions. I also look at personalities. You know, some kids are a little more assertive, I guess would be a nice way to say it, in a discussion, and I don't want to put that person with a child who's real timid and whose feelings are easily hurt. Another thing I look at is their reading speed. Some kids read well, but they just read really slowly, and if I put them in a book like Redwall, they're never going to be able to keep up with their group because they read slowly. And if I don't give a student their first choice when they prioritize their choices, I usually pull them aside privately and talk to them about why I felt like it would be better to put them in another group. And then sometimes it's just because the groups don't balance out, and I'll have 10 kids sign up for one and 2 kids sign up for another. So that's a little bit about forming groups. The next step is reading and preparing. And as I said, for 4 days a week, they had time for independent reading and preparing, and we did daily quick checks. And I mentioned it earlier, and I said I would tell you a little bit more about it right now. Daily quick checks are such a key to the success of the way I was doing literature circles the last few years I did them. Just to back up a little bit, when I started using literature circles early on, I would make weekly assignments for the kids. So this week you guys are going to read 50 pages, it's due on Friday, here's your packet of stuff you have to do to get ready. And there wasn't really a lot of follow-up. I gave them class time to read, but I wasn't checking to see if they were on track. And I guess it just came with experience, but I realized that, okay, on Thursday, half the kids hadn't even finished their reading, let alone, do the assignment. And so it was just setting them up for failure. So I stopped doing that, and I moved to a model where every day the kids would meet together for about 5 minutes, maybe not even 5 minutes, but they would just like go to corners of the room. All right, Hatchet kids go here, or, City of Ember kids go here, or whatever, and they just get together in a little circle at a point a leader, and the leader would ask them, okay, did you do your reading did you finish your reading last night? They had class time to read, but they had to finish at home. Did you fill out your bookmark slip? You have any questions about what happened? Are you confused about anything? And they weren't really getting into a serious discussion about what they read, but they were checking in with each other to make sure that everybody understood it and they were on track. And I would go around with a clipboard and check off to see if there was anybody who had fallen behind or whatever. Sometimes it's because the group gets excited and some kids will say, okay, we're going to read 30 pages tonight, and other kids won't speak up and say that they just, they can't do that, but then the next day they're behind. So then I will step in and say, all right, you guys did 30 pages last night, so you're just going to do 15 today and let everybody catch up. So that was really critical for me in making sure that kids were being successful, and that by the time Friday rolled around and we had our actual book club meetings, they were much more prepared. Okay, as far as preparation strategies, I don't like to stick to one thing every time I do literature circles. I change it up. I change it up weekly. So one week I might use Post-it notes, and during the mini lesson I would teach them how to use Post-it notes to mark things that they wanted to talk about in the discussion group on Friday. So it might be questions they had, predictions, interesting things that were happening in the story, or connections they had with their lives, and so on. It really fits in perfectly with the reading workshop approach. If you're already doing mini lessons, this is just a perfect way for kids to be able to talk with each other about some of those mini lessons. If you have them do journal entries, I would have them do only short journal entries daily. I want to show you what a daily bookmark slip looks like in just a minute. And then sometimes I'll have them do a foldable or graphic organizer, but each day they just complete one part of it. So they don't have to do a whole foldable or graphic organizer every day. Just do one little flap or whatever. And once again, going back to how I started out originally, I had these huge packets of things that the kids had to do, and they got really frustrated with it. It was just way too much work. It took the fun out of it, and really even the discussions weren't that fun because they were just kind of like going through their little packet of stuff that they had done. So this is kind of, I guess this preparation is in place of doing the roles. So this is one of the printables or the activity pages that's in that Classroom Book Club's packet. But you could easily make something yourself like this. But this is a book club notes form that you can give them once a week. And so Monday would be day 1. They put down the date, the page that they read to, and then they just whatever your mini lesson is, or you ask them to write a question in the block. summarize it, tell them something that they want to talk about. There's a lot of things that you can do with these little blocks. And then day 2, 3, and 4 is Monday through Thursday, or if you're not meeting on Fridays, it can just be 4 days. And then they bring this paper with them to the meeting on Friday, and they can use it as something to prompt them about things that they want to talk about. A similar activity is the book club bookmark. I know this is a little bit hard to read, so I'll tell you what's on it. It's a place for their name. You notice there's 4 of them again, so it covers Monday through Thursday. And when they do their little quick check, they tell what page they want to read to. So it says read to page blank by blank, so they read to page 50 by Wednesday or whatever. Then they have to come up with a question or a discussion topic. It's right on the line there, and then they flip it over on the back and they write a short summary of the most important events or the main ideas, and it serves as a perfect little bookmark. And then they bring it to school, and that's one of the things that they check in their in their little daily quick checks, is they have to pull out their bookmark and show that they have it done. And then you may have them staple it into a reading log or something like that so that they don't lose it. And then when they have their book club meetings on Friday, they pull out all their bookmark slips, and they've got lots of things to talk about. I noticed one of the questions, I went through some of the questions that people were asking on Facebook, and also the questions you guys submitted when you signed up for the webinar. And some people were saying, well, how do you keep them on task so they're not talking about all kinds of other things? And I just stopped. I had to really stop and think about it, because I don't really have that problem. I guess it's because they have the sticky notes or the bookmarks or whatever, and they're real eager to talk about all of the things that they have recorded and prepared. Harvey Daniels has a great word for this. He calls it harvesting ideas, that during the week they are harvesting ideas for their discussion. I think that's a great concept. If anybody has an idea they want to share in the chat box about other ways that you have students prepare for literature circles, please drop it in there for other people to take a look at. Okay, we're getting close to the end on the actual format of the week of the literature circles, and the last step that I'm actually going to spend time talking about this evening is the actual book club meetings. So I like to, as I said, they usually fell on Fridays, but if you were trying to meet with different groups at different times, you could meet with one group Monday while the other kids were reading, and then another one Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and so on. Excuse me. I realized in reflecting back on how I did these different meetings that there were really 3 different ways that we had meetings. The first way, I just call it a structured discussion, and there was actually an outline that I gave the students that specified what they did first. 5 minutes you summarize the book, and then the next 15 minutes everybody goes around, or they use the talking sticks method, and they share from their bookmark slips. And so it has like step-by-step instructions for what they do during the meeting, and I appoint a leader. And that is one thing that's in the Classroom Book Club's program. It really explains how you can do a structured approach, but you can come up with your own structured method as well. And then after they get comfortable with that, sometimes we just do a relaxed discussion where we're doing the same type of thing, but we don't have to follow a step-by-step timed out approach quite as closely. An action meeting is where I have the kids do something together, like create a graphic organizer poster. And so instead of having a discussion, they're actually have to create a graphic organizer or do something, maybe create a skit or something like that, where they're talking about what they learned, but they're actually doing something instead of discussing it. And we would do that. We might do that in addition on another day, in addition to having a discussion meeting, or we may just not have the discussion that week and do that. So, and the other thing I didn't mention here is that before you have your students meeting on their own, you probably, the first time you do literature circles, you probably want to do a staggered approach where you can meet with each group individually so they know what to do, especially if it's younger kids. Or you may want to try to get parent volunteers to come in, and or maybe a literacy coach might come in, your principal might come in and help each person take a group, and you give them some guidelines about how you want the group to proceed so that the kids get some kind of a model for how they're supposed to be talking about books. Okay. And then I didn't put in the last step because I really don't have time to talk about it, but some people like to do extension activities after the kids have finished a book club. They might give them a few days to do some kind of extension activity, and I do talk about that in the Classroom Book Clubs program. I like some projects, but I feel like you don't want to take 2 weeks to have kids doing a project, because when they're doing a project, they're not reading. And I like to limit that and just try to keep it kind of in small doses, I guess. There are also assessments you may want to do with your students. So now let's, now that you've kind of listened to the whole outline of the Classroom Book Clubs approach, which I found to be really effective and fun for kids, let's talk a little bit about why you would use literature circles in general, maybe not just Classroom Book Clubs. I think it's pretty obvious by now, so that's kind of why I put it at the end. But you're wanting to actively engage your kids in sharing and discussing books, and I'm going to share with you some of those Common Core standards that you'll see how closely they're aligned. The second one is to supplement your regular reading program, because I don't really recommend using literature circles as your entire reading program. I did try to do that one year, and I wasn't really happy with the results, because there are kids who don't keep up with their literature circle assignments, and they keep falling behind. And you know, that's not a huge issue if that happens. If you do literature circles once every 9 weeks and you have a few kids that don't keep up, it's not going to keep them from making progress that year. But if you do one round of literature circles after another and you have kids that aren't keeping up, you know, that's going to really, that's depriving them of the reading instruction that they need. So I played around with this a lot, and I finally, the best way I love to teach reading is to teach the reading workshop approach about 7 weeks out of the 9 weeks, and do about 2 weeks on a classroom book club. Another reason to use literature circles is it's a great way to differentiate instruction, both by their levels and by their interests. It does provide for student choice in book selection, which is so important in getting kids to love reading. It promotes higher level thinking and analysis, and it motivates kids to enjoy reading. And if you have any other reasons that you can think of why you like to use literature circles, or why, based on what I've presented, you think literature circles would be great, please add those into the chat area. Okay. Now, this is where we're coming back to those Common Core standards. And I see that we're approaching the end of the hour, so I'm going to go through them really quickly. But I really wanted you to see them here, because, as I said, some of you may need to pull out these Common Core standards in order to get permission to even take a few weeks and do literature circles, and actually get your administration to agree to say, okay, stop teaching the Basal Reader for a couple weeks and do a literature circle, and then come back to it. So you see I've got reading grade 4 here. What I did was I just picked grade 4 because as I looked through all of the standards, I looked through like 3rd grade up through 6th or 7th grade, and the wording was so close that I thought, you know, I'm just going to pick one that's kind of in the middle range, because all of you guys have a standard that's something close to this. So on the reading literature 4.1, refer to details and examples in a text when explaining what the text says explicitly and when drawing inferences. I mean, you can see that in a literature circle setting, the kids are going to need to refer to the text in order to support their opinion about what they believe is going to happen, their predictions, their inferences, and so on. So that's clearly in there. 4.2 is to determine a theme of a story, drama, or poem from details in the text to summarize the text. You may not do literature circles on poems, however there might be poems in some of the books you're reading, but certainly there's talking about themes, summarizing, there's daily opportunities to summarize the text. The third one with the literature strand was to describe in depth a character, setting, or event in a story or drama, drawing on specific details in the text. This would be a perfect thing to do with a mini lesson on one of the days that the kids are reading during the week, and maybe one whole week you're digging into something like character, another week you're digging into setting, and when they have their discussion on Friday, that's their focus of discussion. So you can see how easy it is to tie in some of these standards. When you look at the informational text standard, The 4.3 standard says explain events, procedures, ideas, or concepts in a historical, scientific, or technical text, including what happened and why based on specific information in the text. And one thing I didn't mention is, we all have the assumption that literature circles are literature-based and that they're usually based on fiction books. But you can actually have the kids do it on an informational text. There's a lot of really neat ones out there now. Scholastic produces a lot of informational books that are great, topics on animals or volcanoes or robots or outer space or whatever. So their opportunities to discuss would be similar to this, explain these events and procedures and so on. Another one in the informational area would be to compare and contrast a first-hand and second-hand account of the same event or topic, describe the differences in focus and the information provided. So, that would be something that could be the basis of a literature circle discussion. Now, the one that's really huge is this one right here. And the part that's grayed out at the bottom, I'm going to move to another slide so we can read it. But this one is so literature circles. I don't even know how you could do it without some kind of literature circles. Engage effectively in a range of collaborative discussions with diverse partners and texts, building on others' ideas and expressing their own clearly. And then if you look at all of the little subcomponents under that, look at how it just fits perfect with literature circles. Come to discussions prepared, having read or studied required material. Excuse me. Explicitly draw on that preparation and other information known about the topic to explore ideas under discussion. Follow agreed upon rules for discussion and carry out assigned roles. And even though we don't have assigned roles in this model, you might say that filling out their bookmark slip is kind of a role. Pose and respond to specific questions to clarify or follow up on information and so on. And then the last one, review the key ideas expressed and explain their own ideas and understanding in light of the discussion. I mean, that right there is just literature circles all over it. So that's something that all of you have in your standards. You just need to find where it is in your particular grade level. And if you have any resistance on the part of administration, you need to show them it's right there in the standards. So I was very excited to see that level of support for the literature circles model. All right, now it's time for some questions, except I'm looking at my time and seeing that it's just a few minutes before 9. So how about if I skip through the questions and then we'll do the drawing. And if people need to log off, that's fine. And then I'm going to come back to this slide and do these questions and then take other questions. So let me move ahead real quick. So these are all the questions that I plan to talk about, and then also whatever you put in the chat box. So we're going to be doing a drawing for the Classroom Book Clubs program, and I'm not sure why it says or ... I don't know. I think I was trying to say, I don't know, maybe it goes to the next slide. That's kind of a mistake. But anyways, if you already have the Classroom Book Clubs program, you could get something else if you want. And if you live in the United States or Canada, I'll be happy to, if you win it, I'll be happy to actually ship you the physical CD version of it. There is a digital one that I could send to somebody else. So I just want to show you real quickly what is in that program. It consists of 6 short videos. They're slidecast videos. There's an introduction, which is actually available to watch on the website. But lessons 1 through 5 are all about 12 to maybe 18-minute videos going through step-by-step how to do the Classroom Book Clubs model. And it has a little packet of printables that goes along with it. So everything I mentioned in each of the slide casts, there's a worksheet or activity page or whatever that goes with it. And then there's also a study guide that's called Think and Apply that you could use if you wanted to get a group of teachers to do the program together and do it as kind of a study group on it. Okay, so if you want to be entered into the drawing, click on the raised hand icon one time. And I'm going to let everybody do that. And then what I've done is I have already gone to random.org and selected a series of numbers. And as soon as everybody's hand is up who is in the drawing, I will announce the winner. I'm looking down to see how many we have. Oh, it's hard to read those numbers. They're in really tiny print. Okay, let me give everybody a chance to enter. Let's see, we have 177 people in the room. Maybe some people are in a position where they don't really need the item. I just want to make sure I give everybody time to enter, because if somebody's trying to figure out what to do, maybe they missed the introduction. Let me turn off my microphone for just a second. Okay, so the first number that I pulled up in random.org on the list, that is actually the number. I actually put in 1 through 500 because I didn't think there would be 500 people here, but I didn't know, is, let me find the number on here, it is number 96. So if you are number 96, is that D. Strader? It's really hard for me to see the numbers, but it's right, the person right above Melissa Wright. If D. Strader would put your full name in the chat box. Yeah, your number will change now. Like if people leave the room and they don't win, or somebody else, then your numbers will change. So D. Strader was the number that I had. That's Donna Strader. She just put her name in the room. Congratulations, Donna. And if you want to put your email address in the chat box, or if you want to just email me after the webinar, you can do that. Actually, should have your email list if you registered in the normal way to attend today, then I should be able to find it, or you can email me. All right, and then if you didn't win and you're interested in purchasing the Classroom Book Clubs program, I don't know if Peggy has put the link. Peggy, could you put the link in the chat box if you haven't done that, about where they could go if they wanted to purchase it? And if you use the discount CBC webinar, that will give you 25% off the price. And actually, I'll tell you a little secret. We'll actually give you 25% off anything that you buy, because there's no way that I can limit it to just the Classroom Book Club's approach. So the first link that Peggy put in the box is actually a page on my website of free Literature Circle resources. And the one I'm looking for is the one that's called Classroom Book Clubs. I think she already put that up at the top. Anyways, you're looking for the one that's lauracandler.com. I think Book Clubs is the one where you can go if you're interested. All right. So if you have to leave, I perfectly understand, and I appreciate you being with us this evening, but I've got to tell you one thing before you log out. First of all, I did want to mention, if you're not signed up for my Candler's Classroom Connections newsletter with teaching ideas, by signing up for the webinar, your name will get added to the list. You can go to my website for more information, and I also have a Facebook page with lots of teachers who share great ideas. There's lots of great discussion there, so I invite you to join me there. And then I wanted to let you know that we're going to do a question answer session after this. We always stop it at the end of 30 minutes, no matter if there's still questions. You can log out at any time, but you need to be aware when you log out, and you'll click the X in the upper corner, that red X, do not fill out the survey that pops up. That survey is from Classroom Live, and it implies that you're going to get a certificate of attendance, and there are no certificates given for these sessions. That are something for Classroom 2.0 Live. So please just, when you click the X and you see the survey pop up, just exit out of that and don't take time to fill it out. So I guess we'll go back to the question slide. All right, now this is the time we'll go through these questions, and if you have ideas to share, please put them into the chat box. And then if you have your own questions, as soon as I go through these 4, then hang around and put them in the chat box, and you know, we'll answer them as time allows. So one question that I always get is, how can you keep students at approximately the same place in a book? There always seem to be those who fall behind and those who are finished with nothing to do. I guess my approach to this is I like using the reading workshop approach, which means that the kids are going to have their own book to read anyway. So if they set a goal of reading to page 96 by tomorrow and they get done with that, then they just pick up their other book and they read. And that just seems to work really well for me. If you have an AR program or something going at your school, you could just tell them to have another book, like maybe an informational AR book or something, checked out, and just have them, if you're going to be reading every single day, you know, they might, 20 pages a day might be fine so that everybody can keep up, and then the other kids just are expected to pick up another book and continue on. And then a related question is, what do you do when some groups finish before the other groups? Once again, if you use Reading Workshop, it makes it really easy, because when the groups finish, they just go right back into Reading Workshop, which my students loved, just being able to have time to read their own books, and so that worked out perfectly. If you don't teach with the Reading Workshop approach, you are going to need to have some kind of a sponge activity, and maybe some people would like to put ideas that they use in the chat box, but you could have a group work on preparing a skit or something like that. They could do a team poster. There are other things that you can do if you want to have sort of sponge activities, or if you have literacy centers, spelling activities, or other quiet things that they could be working on. That is a concern, but usually there's something that you can figure out. And some teachers, if it's a real short book, they'll just have the group do another real short book. I've done that before too. So one group might do 2 short books in the time that somebody else does a long one. Okay, I just saw a note just looking over because I'm starting to look at the chat, and somebody put they wanted to purchase the printables for the book clubs, but the discount code doesn't work. It is set up for the $19, which is the minimum price on the whole program, so the 25% off won't work on just the printables. However, they might be, I think I have those available at teacherspayteachers.com, and the price might actually be less on that particular item there because of the way I've got it set up, so you could check over there. But anyways, all right, let me go to the next slide here. How do literature circles fit into other reading programs like balanced literacy with centers, basal programs, reading workshop? I think I kind of answered that. My feeling is that it's best to try to get permission to just stop your other reading program and just really focus on the literature circles for 2 to 3 weeks, where the kids can really get involved in their books. They get excited, they want to find out what's going to happen next and that kind of thing, rather than trying to drag it out over 8 or 9 weeks and then the kids are just bored by the time they get to the end of the book. And how do you handle a situation where a student's been absent and returns on the meeting day without having read the material? The way I handled it was I didn't want them in the discussion if that happened, so I had another teacher that I would have them go over to the other classroom to read, so they weren't listening in on the discussion, and they would do their reading and get caught up. So they missed the discussion, but it would give them a chance to get caught up on the material that they missed. And I always made sure that when I brought them over there, the teacher knew they weren't being punished or anything. It was just like a quiet place for them to read and get caught up on their work. So I think that's all of the questions that I already had prepared. So now I'm going to start looking in the chat area. And Peggy, have you been noticing certain questions that have come up that I have not addressed?
Actually, I have saved a few questions for you, Laura.
Okay.
And
great.
They may have blended in with some of the things that you were responding to. Okay. But one person wanted to know, what happens if they don't have the bookmark filled out during the daily quick check? Do they fill it out during that time with their club?
Okay. So during the daily quick check, if they don't have it filled out, like I said that I will go around and I kind of check off who's prepared and who's not prepared and so on. I have like a checklist, and I would record like a note to myself that they weren't prepared, and that would impact their grade later that they weren't prepared. But when they went back to their seat for that independent reading time, they could fill it out at that time, but I would have it on record that they weren't really prepared that day like they were supposed to be. So at the end of the week, when I gave them the grade for literature circles, which I did not discuss at all in this webinar, but it is something that I addressed quite a bit in the Classroom Book Clubs program, but it would impact their weekly grade that they weren't prepared that day.
Great. That's really helpful. And Suzanne was wondering, she said she's really enjoying learning about classroom book clubs, and she wonders what other book you might suggest, or maybe just tips, for a teacher who's been teaching 25 plus years and is afraid of literature circles.
Okay. I can certainly understand that, because having that fear, because it's kind of like letting go of your normal structure, your normal routine. I would suggest for that teacher, it depends on the grade level, but one of my favorite books is called Mini Lessons for Literature Circles. It was written by Harvey Daniels. It's really only good for like 5th and up, maybe 4th. And I think I actually heard a 3rd grade teacher say that she got a lot out of it. But he really writes about like middle school and high school literature circles. But he has all these great mini lessons for teaching, about literature circles, and it has a lot of information. And then there's other books. Another one, and these are actually, that page you dropped in that I gave you the link on literature circles on my website. There's a list of books that I recommend. Like one's called Getting Started with Literature Circles, and one's called the Literature Circle Resource Guide. So I think one thing to do, though, is to start out, if you're not that comfortable with it, you might want to start out meeting with a different group each day instead of having them all meet at one time, because everything else can feel okay and comfortable, but having like 4 groups of kids all meeting at the same time is kind of like the scary part, I think. So
I think you're right about that.
And the other thing is if you have a literacy coach or anybody at your school that's done it before, you might try to get their help, suggestions, and like a literacy coach might be able to come in and take over a group and get some other people to help you out the first time. Right. It's so much fun. I hope people will just do it. Just jump in and just do it and try it.
I so agree, Laura. And what you just said reminded me of something I enjoyed so much when I got to visit your classroom. And when you broke the kids up into their groups, you had parents there, you had former principals there, you had someone who was from the district office. I think he was a science coordinator or something like that. But you can draw in anyone who's willing to come in and spend a little time talking to the kids about their books.
Right, and also I had we were right next to a high school, and I had a helper that came over every day during a certain block of time, like 45 minutes a day, and I taught that student how to how to work with the kids, how to talk with the kids. And a lot of times I had boys that came over, and I would put them with a group of boys. And by the way, one thing I was going to mention, if you look at some of the pictures on my website and of different literature circles, you'll see some of them are all girls and some of them are all boys. And some people might say, well, you should mix them up and have some boys and some girls. I did that sometimes, but sometimes girls, especially in 5th grade, they're going to shut down when they're with boys. And I just found that sometimes I found it was better to just go ahead and have a group of boys and have a group of girls, and then I have a mixed group or whatever. I didn't try to make sure that I mixed it every time.
Those are great tips. Now, a number of people have indicated interest in finding lists of books, fiction and nonfiction, that would be suitable for specific grade levels, like 4th grade lit circles or 5th grade lit circles. Do you know of anything like that?
Well, I'm sure there are things out there, but I'm thinking that something like that would be a great project for like a little Facebook activity.
Yes.
I bet you if I just put on there every day, okay, I'm looking for titles for 4th grade books, and then the next day 5th grade or whatever, I bet that I could get tons of great ideas and try to compile them. So,
I think so too.
I have some that go ahead.
And I was going to say that I'm sure others may have an idea of lists that have already been compiled, because I know I have seen some on the internet.
Oh, yeah, I know.
And would share those links, so that would even be a bonus.
Yeah. That would be great too. The one thing though is I know that there's always these great books that are being written, and like even I've been out of the classroom a year and a few months. I look at a Scholastic Book Club catalog, I feel like I'm totally out of the loop because there's all these great books that I don't know about. So some lists are outdated. You know, what we need to hear from is the regular practicing classroom teacher who knows what the best ones are now, not 10 years ago what was the best kind they had back then. You know, it's like there's
or the librarians.
Right.
Don't forget the librarians. They're awesome resources for you.
They are. That's true.
And there was one other question, Laura,
yeah.
that was asking about if anyone or you have ever just used picture books for lit circles.
I have not. So if any, or when they talk about picture books, I wonder if they mean with no words or if they just mean like children's books that have pictures but limited words.
It could probably be both.
Yeah, I mean there are some books that seem to be written for younger kids, but that are great that you could do a short literature circle on, you know, even with older kids for just a day. And actually on my website, I will say this, I saw something in there about guided reading. The chat's still going pretty fast. But on my website, there's a free thing on the literature circle page. It's not anything you have to buy, but it's about doing mini literature circles using the leveled readers that come with your Basal Reader programs. And I actually used to do little mini literature circles that would only last like a day or two with those leveled readers. So go on my literature circles page on my website to get information about how to do that. That might be a really good place for somebody to start who's a little nervous about doing it with their class too.
Absolutely. I'll find that link again and drop it back in for you, Laura. And there are several people that have raised their hands. Are you ready to now call on some people?
I would be happy to do that, but there's one question that I think I've seen kind of popping up a few times that I haven't got to that I really want to answer, and that is about kids that are on a lower reading level, but they want to read a higher book and like how I deal with that. And I haven't had a chance to tell people about how I love to use audio books and audio materials. So, for example, if the book is Hatchet and I've got some boys that want to be in that group but they're really not capable of reading it on their own, I have the CD of Hatchet and I will let them read and listen to the CD while they're reading the book. The book has to be in their hands and they're reading along with it. And that way they're able to keep up with the book. And I actually have some personal research I did that shows that even though they're reading and listening, they still make really big gains in reading, and later they show it on their end of the year tests when they don't even have the audio support. But the audio support is a key thing to get. So if you've got a book that you want to do that's a little bit harder, but you know that some of your lower readers are going to want to do it, really work hard. You can just go to Amazon.com and search for those things. I bet you can get them on eBay too, where retiring teachers are trying to get rid of their CDs and things. Okay, now back to the microphone. So you saw some hands were up. So it looks like Daniela has her hand up. Did you want to give her the microphone? Oh, her hand went down. Kathy Rigby, want to ask a question?
Yes, I was wondering, how do you assess your students?
How do I assess the students? Okay. Peggy, could you go ahead and turn her microphone off while I answer? I'm getting some feedback or something. Okay. All right. Assessment is a whole other area, and it is actually covered in the Classroom Book Clubs program. I just knew I couldn't get to it today. But I have some self-assessment forms that I use. There's also a book called, I think it's called the Literature Circle Resource Guide, that I got some ideas from. But basically it's kind of like a self-assessment that the kids do, but then I come in with some comments and things. It's not a reading assessment of their reading ability, and it is not a comprehension assessment on whether they comprehended the text. It's more of a self-assessment on how they participated, whether they kept up with their reading, and that kind of thing. And I feel that that is sufficient if you're only doing a literature circle, like, 2 weeks out of the 9 weeks. I can just kind of give them a weekly grade on participation. If you have something like the AR program, you want to give them a test on the book. When I used AR, I did that as well. But that's one reason why this particular model, I don't think it's something that you want to necessarily use all the time. You would definitely need other forms of assessment. And you may want to do a comprehension worksheet or something every once in a while just to make sure that they're making progress if you are using a lot of literature circles. Now, if you have another question, Kathy, was it Kathy who answered? You can certainly take the microphone again if you'd like to ask another question. I was just getting feedback. I don't know if that's sufficient or not, if that was helpful.
No, I don't. Thank you very much.
Okay, sure. Looks like Heather has a question. Did Heather want to take the microphone? I see a little, is that symbol meaning that it's having trouble with the bandwidth or something?
Heather, you just need to click on talk. You have the microphone.
Oh, hello? Hello, can
yeah,
you hear
hi.
me? Oh, hi.
Yes,
Hi.
I can.
Thank you.
Hi.
Oh, hi. I'm really excited about this. I teach 6th grade in a middle school, and our time is not nearly as flexible, and I have about 100 students, and I only have so many copies of books, so they have to read in class as opposed to being able to take it home to to read on their own. I'm wondering if that is a typical issue, and if there's a way to kind of, overcome that problem.
Okay. If Peggy, could you turn off her microphone because I'm hearing the feedback again. All right, there we go. Okay, those are some really good questions, and one thing I'm going to do is, if we've got any middle school teachers in the room here, if anybody wants to put their answers in the chat box, that would certainly be helpful. It's definitely more of a challenge to do literature circles if you've got limited books, especially as a middle school teacher. Even if you had unlimited books, for you to try to kind of keep up with all these different books might be hard. So I would say that you're not going to be able to get your literature circles done in 2 weeks. If you would need to have other activities and have like a certain block of time, like 30 minutes a day is for the reading. You'd have to be really careful about who you put in what groups to make sure that they were able to get the reading done. You may want to try to have just a couple of copies that could be checked out, or maybe even send a note home to the parents, see if they could get a copy from the library or something, so that the student could do some extra reading at home if needed. Maybe let them come in first thing in the morning if you have any flexibility there. But certainly you're not going to be able to move as quickly, so you'll need to have some other sponge activities, literacy activities, maybe their own book. They only read 10 pages a day in their literature circle book, and then the rest of the 20 minutes or whatever you're giving for reading, they're going to have to read their own book. So definitely there's more challenges in the middle school setting, but I know that there are middle school teachers that are using literature circles, and I bet you that book that I mentioned, Mini Lessons for Literature Circles by Harvey Daniels, that might really give you some good resources, because he's talking all about middle school when he, in his book. I just didn't really pay attention to the scheduling part as much because it wasn't an issue for me. I hope that's okay. And if you have another question, if you want to put it in the chat box that you still have another question or something, or Peggy can give you back the microphone if you have a follow-up question. Nope, she put her hand down. So, all right, we've got J Star, who has raised her hand. Jay, just
here I am.
There you go. And what's your name? Yes, I can.
Judy. J Star.
Judy. Okay.
Star. Okay. My question is, you were saying about on Mondays through Thursdays where you might suspend your regular reading workshop, and students would use their time to read. And so I was wondering, so while the students are reading, are you checking in with individual book clubs? The teacher, what is the teacher? Is the teacher checking in with individual book clubs?
Okay, I'm just thinking back. Okay, all right. So, because it's just been a couple of years since I did it, since I've been out of the classroom. So when the kids were reading, I believe I really kind of used a model very similar to the reading workshop approach, where I was checking in with individual readers as I normally do during reading workshop. But I guess the main difference is that instead of them reading books of their own choice, they were all reading books for their literature circle groups. But I was still checking in with them. And you could still do guided reading. Like you could still pull a group each day and do guided reading, but they would be using that same guided reading. Like you wouldn't want to pull them to do a guided reading group and give them a leveled reader because that's something totally different, but you could do guided reading out of the book that they're doing. So that's, that's kind of how it could be integrated into some other programs. I hope that makes sense. Peggy, you want to give her? Okay.
Yeah, that did make sense. Thanks a lot. I did have a question about the check-in.
Okay. Yeah.
Because I thought that was, really, it can be really critical because when students are, off reading and you don't really, there's no way for the teacher to really have a barometer about what's going on with each group.
Mm-hmm.
So just for a point of clarity, I know you said that the groups meet with one another, but does the teacher also have to sort of get in there with every group in order to really know who's up to speed, or do they have a leader report back? Or do the students just sort of encourage and monitor one another?
Okay, good question there. All right, so you're exactly right. They went to, hang on, I need to, okay, there we go. There was just a little echo effect on your microphone, so Peggy turned it off. So they would go to their groups, and yes, there was a leader that was appointed for each person who was kind of taking account, and there's like a little series of questions that they would have to ask. Did you finish your reading, and so on. But I went to each group while they were meeting, so I might just stop in for 1 minute with each group, and I would just say, did everybody do their reading, or who's not prepared? And I had a checklist, and I would just check off on my checklist little notes, and I'd put just like a check plus next to each kid's name who had their book, they did their reading, they had their bookmark. If they didn't have their bookmark, I might put like NB for no bookmark, or just like little codes and things that I used so that I knew what was going on, because you're exactly right. Like that's your one opportunity to just kind of make a quick sweep of the room and see who's on target, and then the kids that weren't ready, maybe pull them after the quick check is over. What's going on? Why weren't you able to be ready? What can I do to help? And they might need a CD or something if they're falling behind, so maybe the book's a little too hard or something like that. But that's a very good point to make. The teachers, it's not enough to just have the kids go in groups and check in with each other. Teachers got to quickly bop around to each group and find out what's going on. Okay, I think we have time for maybe one more question. If anybody has a question, or I can look and see if there's something in the chat box that hasn't been answered. Have you seen anything, Peggy?
Actually, yes, there was another question that I had saved. And Kim was wondering, are there certain traits that make a book good for literature circles?
Okay, that's a really good question to finish up on, because that's something I do like to talk about, and I never even thought about bringing it up. But to me, personally, there needs to be, how do I say it? There's got to be action or adventure, or if you don't have those, there's got to be like maybe something controversial or some like deep emotion, something that the kids can really connect with. There are some of the books that the kids say they love to read. Like, I'll give you an example. The Best Christmas Pageant Ever is a great book. Is that the title? Best? I'm not even sure if I got the right title. But anyways, it's a great book that I would read to kids at Christmas. But then another book came out, and I forget what the title was, by the same author. And it was just a series of silly things that the kids did, and there's like no point to it, and the kids tried to do a literature circle on it, and it's like they had nothing to talk about. It was like funny to read, but there was nothing to talk about. So I do like to find books that have some deeper meaning. Like Hatchet's really good for the survival aspects, really good for prediction. Things like Maniac McGee with racial prejudice issues. Of course, that would be one you would not want to do too young, and you would really want to closely monitor that because kids can misinterpret what's going on in the book. City of Ember was great because it had a lot of adventure, and you didn't really know what was going on or where the kids were. So yeah, and I would definitely say if you would want to survey your kids if there's a movie out like City of Ember. If they've already watched the movie, don't put them in the group. They're just going to spoil it for everybody, and they're not really going to enjoy the group. So that's one thing that we need to check for nowadays. So I guess that's about it then, since it's right at 9:30. And unless you had something else you wanted to say, Peggy, I'm so grateful for all the people who showed up on their winter holiday here and contributed to our discussion. And I appreciate you being here, Peggy, and keeping everything on track, because I certainly could not do this without you, without a moderator, and you do an excellent job. So as people log out, you remember to click that red X, disregard the survey, and I will probably send the recording out sometime tomorrow. I don't know your schedule, Peggy, whether you're going to be able to get to it tomorrow or not, but it'll be there for you to go back and review. Download it on an iPhone or an iPad or something and listen to it later if you want to review some of the points. So thanks so much, everybody.